This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. Donald Trump hasn't attacked the Georgia criminal judge, Scott McAfee, who's presiding over now 18 criminal co-conspirators, including Donald Trump, and the trial that starts on October 23rd against Ken Chesebro and Sidney Powell. But he might wish he had, because what we're learning now about Scott McAfee is that A, he doesn't play. B, he issues succinct orders in under 3 pages that blow major holes in the defense, including for Donald Trump. And 3, he's got a deadly sense of humor. And I think I know where that all came from. Tune in for this hot take right now and we'll break it down. How did I learn what I'm about to tell you about Scott McAfee that's going to guide our perception of him moving forward? It's the velocity at which he enters orders denying ridiculous motions to dismiss and motions to quash the indictment. We're watching him as in action. It's almost a dress rehearsal for Donald Trump when his trial gets around to being tried in Georgia, state court, not federal, in the beginning of 2024. So whatever Judge McAfee is doing now in the motions that are being filed really exclusively by Ken Chesebro, the constitutional quote unquote scholar, and I heavy emphasis there on that scholar word's doing a heavy lift in that sentence, who came up and devised the fake elector scheme. He likes to call it the alternate elector scheme, but let's call it for what it is and what others in the scheme called it at the time, the fake elector scheme, to try to confuse, apparently, Mike Pence, or at least pressure him to accept the fake electors in favor of Donald Trump instead of the real certified electors and electoral certificates from each state that were all for Joe Biden, giving him the election in what amounted to a landslide against Donald Trump. That Ken Chesebro, just as he was half-baked and half-witted in his analysis of how to implement the fake elector scheme, which also brought down and entangled at least 5 other co-conspirators who have been indicted by Fani Willis, Ken Chesebro and his lawyer Scott Grubman are doing the same thing in their filings. And they're filing them ad seriatim, and they're getting denied just as fast. You know, sometimes I feel like the denial by Judge Scott McAfee is coming out before the motion is actually filed. That's how quick McAfee is. And it stands in stark contrast to another young Federalist Society judge, a Republican-appointed judge down in Miami, in the Southern District of Florida, sitting in Fort Pierce, Judge Cannon. Judge Cannon is intentionally dragging her feet and slow-footing the case against Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago in order to give him an advantage. It's obvious. Whereas Scott McAfee issues a 1-page order in 1 week's time announcing that there will be an anonymous jury protecting the jury from Donald Trump and the others without fanfare, without drama, without celebrity. You know, Scott McAfee, to be fair, is not a guy that's going to take off his glasses and smile to the camera the way we just saw Judge Engoron do in the fraud case. It was funny, and that's a fraud case, and that's a civil case. But this criminal judge is deadly serious and also has a deadly sense of humor that is not lost on this hot take and probably not on Donald Trump's lawyers. What am I talking about? Get to it, Popok. Scott McAfee has had to handle so many motions to dismiss and motions to quash the indictment by Ken Chesebro that if it wasn't for Legal AF, you wouldn't be able to keep track of them all. There's been at least 6 motions by Chesebro to try to get rid of his indictment, to suppress evidence, to avoid the trial, and they all got rejected. Motion to suppress the evidence related to his email account at MSN or Microsoft with all the emails with Rudy Giuliani showing the extent of the conspiracy, denied. Motion to dismiss the indictment because he was just a lawyer giving legal advice and it was justified and has a justification defense, denied. And this one was one of my favorites because they got the judge to use his special brand of humor, special brand of being a law nerd. He used a reference to Monty Python and a skit from the famous Monty Python British comedy troupe, the Dead Parrot skit. And you know, when I'm mentioning the Dead Parrot skit, where a person tries to return a dead parrot and argue to the pet shop owner that it's alive, just replaced pet shop owner with Scott McAfee, and the lawyers for Chesebro, Scott Grubman, as the guy trying to sell back the dead parrot as a live one. And you'll see where this is going. Ken Chesebro decided that he's going to try to attack the special prosecutor that's been trying the day-to-day case for Fani Willis. Fani Willis is the Fulton County DA, but she appointed somebody from private practice to handle the day-to-day trial work, even make some of the presentation to the grand jury. And that is a lawyer in Georgia in that area called Nathan Wade. And Mr. Wade became a special assistant district attorney, a special ADA. In my career, I was a special ADA to handle an appeal for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office when I was like a first-year lawyer, second-year lawyer, to give me some legal appellate experience to argue on my feet when I worked for a giant firm. It's not unusual for private practice people to be appointed on a limited basis to be a special purpose assistant district attorney, and that's what Mr. Wade is. So they decided that even though the statute in Georgia says that a special officer who's only appointed for one case does not have to take a public oath of office, they wrote an aha motion. Aha! Mr. Wade didn't sign or take an oath of office, and he's a public officer. And so everything he's done has been inappropriate, including getting the indictment returned by the grand jury. Aren't we so smart, Judge? The judge, in 3 pages, in 3 days, came back and said, you're misreading the statute again. You bury as a footnote in your own pleading, your own motion, that you know that the statute says if it's a special purpose assignment, that person doesn't have to take the oath, and yet you continue to argue it. And that's where the dead parrot reference came from, because the judge literally said, under the oath argument, as he segued into another section of his order denying completely Chesebro's current motion to dismiss the indictment, number 6, if you're counting at home, the judge said, quote, and if this parrot of a motion is not yet dead, and then he went on to say it's dead now because there's been no prejudice, even if you're right that the oath of office should have been taken by Mr. Wade. What is your prejudice? He can fix it now if I found that he needed to have an oath, and no, you're not going to get your indictment dismissed. Any judge, regardless of party affiliation or how he was appointed or she was appointed, that will cite Monty Python to show how ridiculous the other side is, not even tongue-in-cheek, just straight tongue, it's got my vote right away. Boxing streaming services, that exercise app to show your friends you biked 20 miles in the rain, and your hometown newspaper for that one homecoming game score. There's subscriptions for everything these days, and sometimes it feels impossible to keep tabs on what you're paying for every month. That's why I'm such a huge fan of Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills all in one place. Most people think they're spending $80 on their subscriptions, when in reality, the number is closer to $200. When you're signed up for so many things, like streaming services you used to watch one show with, or free trials for delivery you don't use, it's so easy to lose track of what you're paying for. With Rocket Money, you can easily cancel the ones you don't want with just the press of a button. No more long hold times or annoying emails with customer service. Rocket Money does all the work for you. Rocket Money can even negotiate to lower your bills for you by up to 20%. All you have to do is take a picture of your bill, and Rocket Money takes care of the rest. Rocket Money also lets you monitor all your expenses in one place, recommends custom budgets based on your past spending, and they'll even send you notifications when you've reached your spending limits. With over 3 million users and counting, Rocket Money customers have saved an average of $720 a year. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and manage your money the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/legalaf. That's rocketmoney.com/legalaf. rocketmoney.com/legalaf. We've on Legal AF, we've been admiring the work of Scott McAfee. And one of the reasons that he's doing so well I believe, is now we're learning more about him. And he is a law nerd, and he is a nerd. And nerds and law nerds like things like Monty Python, and they also like things like when they're competing in a high school competition and they're a classically trained cellist and play the cello, of course, like Judge McAfee, who still plays instruments, they will, in a competition, put a red, white, and blue bandana on their head and drop to their knees to play the Star-Spangled Banner, Jimi Hendrix style, but on an electric cello. How do I know all that? Because that's what's great about YouTube. We have found the clip. Let's play it. So what did I learn from a clip of Scott McAfee, the judge who's presiding over the Donald Trump case, that I didn't know before? A, he's got a sense of humor. B, he's a law nerd. C, he's the exact kind of person that would be the antithesis of Donald Trump. And he's not even like Judge Engoron, who's been driving Donald Trump crazy as the trial judge for the civil fraud case. I also learned from a recent interview in the New Yorker magazine about Scott McAfee, and I'll bring it to you here. In an interview, Scott McAfee said his job, his role, is to basically recede into the woodwork, not make the case about him. He cited specifically Judge Ito, Lance Ito, in the O.J. Simpson case, and other judges, and said, that's not going to be me. I am not looking for celebrity or fame. I'm looking to be not controversial and not a part of the case other than my role as a judge. And so that, again, is a deadly sober approach to being a jurist that runs counter to all of the acting out, tantrum throwing shenanigans of Donald Trump and more, including his ranting and raving, violent rhetoric, and contemptuous behavior towards our and contumacious behavior towards our justice system. And he has met his match now in Scott McAfee. I did that cello thing just to show you, because we don't often know much about the judges that are on there, but there we are. The other funny round out to the interview that I liked is that Judge McAfee said that his next instrument that he's going to take up are the bagpipes, because if he takes up the bagpipes, when he retires from being a judge, he'll always have a steady paycheck, because everybody wants a bagpipe player at a wedding, and there aren't a lot of them. Him referencing that he had been a wedding musician and played the cello for money before he decided to go to law school. We like Scott McAfee because not because he's red or blue or anything else, because he's running an appropriate courtroom, showing the judicial temperament that we expect from somebody who is handling probably the most important, other than with Judge Chutkan in the D.C. Circuit election interference case, the most important and pivotal cases in U.S. history against a former president for conspiracy to interfere with the election to have him cling to power. We had worried about Scott McAfee, but I think now we were wrong in the beginning, because we only had his very scant resume. 30-something, had been a Federalist Society member in law school and appointed by a Republican Governor Kemp. But then when we really got into the nuances, which is what we do here on the MeidasTouch Network and on Legal AF, the podcast that I co-anchor, we get into it at the molecular level and try to bring it to you and update our analysis as we learn more facts and connect more dots. Now that we know more about Scott McAfee, things are falling into place. One, in the interview with New Yorker magazine, he said that he was a Federalist not out of ideology, but out of social or business connections. You know, Georgia has a heavy amount of Republicans, and for business purposes, you got to pick a side. You know, if you're going to be in the Rotary Club, you're going to be in the Lions Club, you're going to be, you're going to be a Federalist or not a Federalist. And frankly, the Democrat lawyers don't really have a club that's the analogous of the Federalist Society. So if you're like a conservative kid, and I mean that in the traditional sense, that's going to law school, Federalist Society is where you end up. But he made it clear that it's not his ideology. It's really just a business connection or business contact group for him. So we didn't have to worry as much as that. We know that Kemp is not a Trumper, the governor of Georgia, at all. In fact, he'll testify against Donald Trump in this case, as we expect. And even though McAfee had only been on the court for a very short amount of time, as a very young judge, and he'd only been on the bench for 6 months, we're like, oh, we slapped our foreheads. Oh, here we go. Most important case of the century. We got a newbie. But he's got a lot of experience. Two that we've talked about. One, he was in the immediate predecessor to being a judge, previously to being a judge. He was the inspector general for the state of Georgia, which means he's like the chief Boy Scout for the state. That's what the inspector general does. Inspects fraud and waste within the government, and sort of the government's watchdog, internal. And those usually go to people who are unimpeachable in their ethics and in their judgment. I know personally the Office of Inspector General head here in New York, and we've had her on our show, Lucy Lang, and she fits that bill just as I expect Scott McAfee does. And then the other thing that we learned about him besides that is that he worked under Fani Willis, which doesn't get a lot of press, when he was in the Fulton County District Attorney's office. I mean, literally, she was his boss and helped him learn how to be a trial lawyer and a trial person, because she headed a division before she became and ran for the Fulton County DA office. And I'm sure he has a lot of respect for her and does things, so far has sided with her almost universally. That's what we know about Scott McAfee. But more importantly, Ken Chesebro's desperate efforts to try to avoid a trial are going nowhere fast. I also note that his co-defendant, because it's a trial party of two, starting on the 23rd of October, we believe for now, it doesn't join in a lot of his motions. She's sort of very silent. I report very little about Sidney Powell, the other person who was involved with the Coffee County break-in and download of election data from Dominion voting machines, and her role as co-captain of Team Crazy, filing all these lawsuits, 70 of them around the country with Rudy Giuliani. I talk very little about her motion practice because she doesn't really file any. I'll do another hot take about somebody in the co-conspirator camp who's thrown Sidney Powell under the bus, like Scott Hall, a former bail bondsman who already pled guilty. But Sidney Powell doesn't. Her special brand of crazy is different than Ken Chesebro's special brand of crazy. And Scott McAfee, with that sense of humor, is calling it out in deadly fashion. Until the next hot take from Michael Popok here, or my next episode of Legal AF only on the MeidasTouch Network. Look for me on Wednesdays and Saturdays, where I pull it together with my co-anchors. Karen Friedman-Agnifilo, 30-year prosecutor. Ben Meisalis, longtime civil rights lawyer, co-founder of the MeidasTouch Network. And we do that show, Legal AF. Yes, it's what you think, to talk about issues that matter like this at the intersection of law, politics, and justice. Give me a thumbs up on this. Helps with the ratings, helps keep my content coming to you. And until my next hot take and my next episode of Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Hey, Meidas Mighty. Love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.